Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am Joey Francis, your life, love, and relationship coach. Thank you so much for joining me. This week, I want to talk about something I've been seeing more and more in clients, in friends, in conversation, and the world around us. Something that's becoming a real issue for a lot of men, even if they don't talk about it out loud. It's the growing number of men who feel alone, not just single, alone, disconnected, tired, unsure of where they fit, unsure of what they're supposed to be in a world that keeps changing faster than anyone can keep up with. And from my perspective, there are a lot of reasons behind this, reasons that come from the way men were raised, the way dating has shifted, the expectations placed on men today, and the emotional skills many of us were never taught. But it matters. The world today is not the world we grew up in, and that's not a bad thing. It's just different. Women today are more independent than ever, financially, emotionally, socially. They don't need a man to survive, and honestly, that's great. That's how it should be. But here's where things get complicated. Even though women don't need those traditional roles anymore, a lot of them still want them. They still want a man who's stable, a man who's reliable, who can lead when needed, a man who can protect, provide, and support, not because she can't do it herself, but because she wants a partner who brings something solid to the table. And this is where a lot of men get confused. Because for generations, men were raised with one script: be the provider. Be the protector. Be the rock. Don't complain. Don't feel. Don't need anything. Just perform. That was the job description. But now the world is saying, women don't need that anymore. But also, make sure you can still do all of that. But also, be emotionally intelligent. But also, don't be too emotional. But also, don't be too stoic. But also, don't be too hard. And men are sitting there like, okay, what exactly am I supposed to be? Because if you're not needed in the traditional sense, but you're still expected to show up in those traditional ways, it creates this weird identity crisis. And that's where a lot of loneliness starts. Not because men don't want connection, not because men don't want love, not because they don't know what role they're supposed to play anymore. And when you don't know your role, you start to feel invisible, replaceable, like you don't matter. And what makes it worse is that nobody's talking about it. Men aren't communicating what they're feeling. Women aren't communicating what they actually want. Everyone's assuming the other person should just know. And that silence, that lack of clarity, is creating even more distance. Because when expectations aren't spoken, people fill in the blanks with fear, insecurity, and assumption. And that's how two people who want the same thing end up feeling like they're on opposite sides of the world. Another idea I have about why so many men feel lonely today comes down to something a lot of men were never taught: emotional intelligence. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I'm not saying men are dumb or incapable. I'm saying most men were raised with a very specific skill set. Work hard, provide, protect, solve problems, don't complain, don't cry, don't talk. Just get it done. That's what a man meant. That's what being a man meant for a long time. But here's the reality. Most men were never taught how to be emotionally available. They were taught how to be useful. And those two things are completely different. So now when women say they want a man who can communicate, who can be vulnerable, who can express himself, who can talk about what he's feeling, a lot of men freeze. Not because they don't care, not because they don't want to, but because they genuinely don't know how. Nobody taught them how to identify their emotions. Nobody taught them how to talk about what's going on inside. Nobody taught them how to build intimacy without feeling weak or exposed. And here's the part people don't talk about. When a man has never been taught emotional skills, he doesn't just struggle to connect with others, he struggles to connect with himself. That's why so many men feel lonely, even in relationships. They're not alone, but they don't feel understood. They don't feel seen. They don't feel safe opening up. And even when they do, society looks down on them. Women see them as being weak. They don't feel like they have the tools to express what's going on inside. And when you can't express yourself, you end up shutting down. You end up withdrawing. You end up feeling like you're on an island, even when someone is sitting right beside you. And here's the kicker. Women today expect emotional intelligence, and they should. But men were never prepared for that shift. So now you have this massive disconnect. Women want emotional depth. Men were raised to avoid emotional depth. Women want communication. Men were raised to keep everything inside. Women want vulnerability. Men were raised to see vulnerability as weakness. And nobody is explaining the new rules. Well, almost nobody, because here I am. Nobody's teaching men how to catch up. Nobody's giving them the tools. Nobody's saying, hey, this is how you build emotional connections in a healthy way. And even when someone tries, a lot of men don't want to listen and don't believe it's necessary. Funny enough, when people ask me, about those who I coach, and I say, it's majority women. And they're like, really? It's majority women? I'm like, yeah, of course. Men already know everything. Obviously, that's not the truth. But it's because if I do try to talk to a man about certain things, and my views don't agree with his, I'm wrong. And that's that. There's no open-mindedness. There's no going deeper. There's none of that. And for a guy, because there are some that are open and honest and self-aware, but until they reach that point, help from someone like me, it's not going to work. So what happens? Men feel like they're failing. Women feel like men don't care. And both sides end up frustrated, disappointed, and confused. And the truth is, most men aren't emotionally available. They're emotionally untrained. And that lack of training, that gap, is one of the reasons, in my opinion, that so many men feel alone today. Another idea I have about why men feel overlooked today comes down to something simple. The dating market isn't operating on character anymore. It's operating on optics. People love to say women want a man who's stable, emotionally intelligent, grounded, and secure. And long term, I do believe that's the truth. But in the initial dating economy, especially online, that's not who gets the attention. The men who get the most visibility, the most matches, the most interest are not the emotionally mature, reliable men. It's the men who fit a very narrow, very superficial profile. Extremely tall, extremely fit, extremely attractive, wealthy or appearing wealthy, high status, flashy, bold energy. And here's the part people don't talk about. Those men rarely settle down. And the reason is they don't have to. When you're a man who checks those extreme boxes, it seems like you have an unlimited amount of options. You're not in a rush, you're not pressured, and you're not worried about being overlooked. You're not thinking about commitment. You're thinking about selection. And when a man has endless options, he doesn't feel urgency. He doesn't feel scarcity. He doesn't feel the need to invest deeply. He doesn't feel the need to choose one person. So what happens? A huge percentage of women chase the same tiny group of men. And that tiny group of men isn't chasing commitment. They're enjoying the abundance. Meanwhile, the men who would commit, the loyal, the grounded, emotionally available, stable men, get overlooked in the process. Not because they're lacking, not because they're unattractive, but because the attention economy funnels everything towards the extremes. And dating apps amplify this even more. And you know, because I've said it a million times, how I like dating apps for what they provide in the dating world and the options that provide. Is it going to be tough for 80 to 90% of men? Yes, it is. That doesn't mean you should give up. It just means you should try harder. And here's the thing. A ridiculously good-looking, tall guy can write the most unhinged, toxic bio imaginable, even admitting to abusive behavior, and still get matches. There was an article that I read that they took a man's profile, a very good-looking man, tall, made him seem wealthy, and in his bio, they wrote that he was convicted of abusing women, and he was still getting hundreds of matches. That tells you everything about how skewed the system is. Because on apps, women aren't filtering for character. They're filtering for height, looks, lifestyle, and status. The things that pop instantly. So the men who would actually make great partners get buried, not rejected, buried, not unwanted, unseen. And here's the truth. Men aren't struggling because they're not valuable. They're struggling because the dating market rewards extremes, not substance. And once men realize this, they stop taking it personally. They stop chasing validation. They stop trying to compete with a fantasy. And they start focusing on their own lives, their own peace, their own growth. And when they get matches, when they do get attention, they will not sacrifice their peace. They will not resort to transactional relationships because they have become self-aware to what's really important. I have another story for you. There's this guy I know in his early 40s, amazing guy, hardworking, loyal, the type of man who shows up, does what he says he's going to do, and genuinely wants to build something real with someone. But for the most of his adult life, he kept ending up in relationships that were nothing but chaos. And I don't mean the normal ups and downs. I mean chaos. Every week was a new crisis. Every argument turned into a war. Every disagreement became a character assassination. Every time something went wrong, he blamed himself. Every time she was upset, he felt responsible for fixing it. And he stayed. He stayed for long after the red flags showed up. He stayed long after his friends told him to leave. He stayed long after he stopped recognizing himself, not because he enjoyed the chaos, not because he was weak, because he genuinely believed that loyalty meant holding everything together, even when he was the only one holding anything at all. And here's the sad part. Eventually, his body gave out. This is a true story. One day, he blacked out, collapsed completely, woke up in a hospital bed. The doctors ran every test, heart, blood work, scans, and physically, he was perfectly healthy. Nothing wrong with him at all. It was the stress. Years of emotional overload, years of carrying weight that wasn't his, years of being the emotional punching bag, the therapist, the stabilizer, the fixer, the one who absorbs everything and gets nothing back. And after that moment, he made a quiet decision. I'm done. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not putting myself in a position where someone else's chaos becomes my responsibility. And he walked away from dating altogether, not because he hates women, not because he's bitter, not because he's angry, but because peace, actual peace, felt safer than risking that kind of collapse again. Now, what that story shows, at least in my opinion, is that a lot of men today don't see peace and love as two things that can exist together. They see them as opposite. They see relationships as something that takes from them, not something that supports them. And once a man has lived through enough chaos, he starts to believe that choosing peace means choosing to be alone. And here's the thing. His story isn't rare. His story is just one version of what a lot of men have lived through in different ways. Some men have went through divorces that wiped them out financially. Some lost their homes. Some lost access to their kids for months, even years, because of court delays. Some watched everything they built get taken away in a matter of a signature. Some were taken advantage of emotionally, financially, or legally. Some were manipulated, drained, or used until there was nothing left. And after you've lived through something like that, after you've watched your life fall apart because you chose the wrong person, you don't just bounce back. You become cautious. You become protective of your peace. You become very selective. You become slow to trust. You become aware of how much you can lose by choosing wrong. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. Men aren't afraid of commitment. They're afraid of committing to the wrong person. Because the consequences for men, emotionally, financially, legally, mentally, can be absolutely, catastrophically devastating. And when a man has lived through enough chaos, being alone doesn't feel like a punishment. It feels like safety. It feels like control. It feels like finally being able to breathe. And that's one of the reasons, in my opinion, why so many men today are choosing peace over partnership. But the truth is, peace and love aren't supposed to compete. Peace is supposed to be the foundation of love. The problem is that many men have only experienced a version of love that costs them their peace. So they assume that's how relationships are. They assume that being single is the only way to stay grounded, stable, and sane. And that's the shift I want men to understand. You don't have to choose between peace and partnership. You just have to choose better than you did before. You have to choose someone who adds to your life instead of draining it, someone who brings clarity instead of confusion, someone who doesn't make you sacrifice yourself just to keep the relationship alive. Because the right relationship doesn't take your peace away. In fact, it protects it. Another idea I have about why so many men are choosing to stay single today has nothing to do with pain or trauma at all. It's because a lot of men, especially men in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, have finally built lives they actually enjoy. They've built careers, they've built routines, they've built stability, they've built confidence, they've built hobbies, friendships, and a sense of identity that isn't tied to a relationship. And once a man reaches that point, he becomes very intentional about who he lets into his world, not because he's scared, not because he's bitter, but because he knows what it took to build that life. He's not willing to let the wrong person disrupt it. These men aren't sitting at home lonely. They're not desperate. They're not waiting for someone to save them. They're not chasing validation. They're not trying to prove anything. They are simply at a stage where peace isn't optional anymore. And here's the part people don't understand. When a man finally likes his life, he's not going to gamble it on someone who brings chaos, confusion, or instability. He's not going to give up his routines for someone who doesn't respect them. He's not going to sacrifice his mental clarity for someone who can't regulate their emotions. He's not going to trade his stability for drama disguised as passion. He's not going to abandon his growth for someone who isn't growing. Because at this stage, men aren't looking for excitement. They're looking for alignment. They want someone who fits into the life they've built, not someone who expects them to tear it down. Someone who brings calm, not chaos. Someone who communicates, not someone who explodes. Someone who knows who they are, not someone who expects him to build their identity for them. And if a man doesn't see that, if he doesn't feel that, he'd rather stay single. Not out of fear, not out of trauma, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. Because once a man has built a life he's proud of, he's not going to let just anyone walk into it. My message about all of this, the supply-demand, imbalance, the overlooked men, the chaos some men survived, the peace they're protecting now, is that none of it means men are doomed or that relationships are dead. What it really means is that the standards have changed. The world has changed, and men are being forced to evolve in ways nobody prepared them for. Because here's the truth, men today are expected to be everything at once. Emotionally intelligent, financially stable, physically fit, socially confident, mentally healthy, ambitious, grounded, healed, self-aware. And they're expected to do it alone. No guidance, no mentorship, no roadmap, just figure it out. And while men are doing that work quietly, privately, without applause, they're also navigating a dating market that doesn't always reward things they're actually good at. Loyalty, consistency, integrity, stability, emotional steadiness. The things that make a man a great partner long term. So a lot of men end up feeling like they're doing everything right and still being overlooked. But here's the part I want men to hear. You're not behind. You're not failing. You're not invisible. You're not unwanted. You're living in a moment where the world is shifting and you're trying to find your place in it. And that takes time. That takes patience. That takes self-respect. That takes knowing your value even when the market doesn't reflect it back to you immediately. And the men who understand that, the men who stay grounded, who stay focused, who keep building themselves, those are the men who end up with the relationships that actually last. Not because they chased harder, not because they begged for attention, but because they became the kind of men who don't settle for chaos, confusion, or emotional instability. They choose peace. They choose alignment. They choose someone who chooses them back. They choose a relationship that feels like partnership, not punishment. And that's the message I want men to walk away with. You don't need to be the top slice to be valuable. You don't need to be perfect to be loved. You don't need to compete with extremes to be chosen. You just need to be the man who refuses to abandon himself. Because the moment you stop chasing the wrong things, you create space for the right things to find you. Now, where do I think this is all heading? All of this is heading is that men are becoming far more intentional about the kind of lives they want to live and the kind of relationships they're willing to participate in. You can feel it happening quietly, almost like a gentleman's revolution. Something that even I tried to create many, many years ago. Men are waking up, not in an angry way, not in a rebellious way, but in a grounded, self-aware, emotionally intelligent way. Men are learning to regulate their emotions. Men are learning to communicate. Men are learning how to set boundaries. Men are learning how to walk away from chaos. Men are learning how to choose peace over a validation. Men are learning how to build lives they actually enjoy. And as more men do this, something interesting is going to happen. The loneliness crisis won't belong to men anymore. It will shift. It will flip. The tables will turn. Because when men stop chasing, stop settling, stop tolerating instability, and start valuing themselves, the dating market changes. The dynamic changes. The power changes. And here's the part that ties it all together. Men are no longer interested in transactional relationships. They don't want to be chosen for what they provide, what they earn, or what they can upgrade. They don't want to be evaluated like a resume. They don't want to be loved conditionally. They want something real, A relationship built on communication, not conditions. On loyalty, not leverage. On peace, not performance. On mutual respect, not silent expectations. And as more men become emotionally intelligent and self-aware, the bar rises, the standards rises, the expectations rises, and the women who once had endless options will start to realize something. Options don't matter if the men you want have standards, because the men who have done the work, the men who have healed, who grew, who built themselves, they're not going to settle for chaos, disrespect, or transactional affection. They're not going to gamble their peace on someone who doesn't bring peace back. They'll wait for alignment. They'll wait for reciprocity. They will wait for someone who values character over conditions. And that's the future I see coming. Not a world where men are lonely, but a world where men are selective. A world where men are grounded. A world where men are valued again, not for extremes, but for substance. A world where the good men finally win. And if there's one thing I want men to take from all of this, it's that you're not broken for wanting peace. You're not weak for wanting stability. You're not avoiding commitment because you refuse to tolerate chaos. You're not behind because you're taking your time. You're not less of a man because you're selective. You, my friend, are evolving. You are becoming more self-aware. You're becoming more emotionally intelligent. And you're becoming more grounded, more intentional. You're becoming the man who doesn't abandon himself just to be chosen. And that's the shift that's happening right now, quietly, slowly, but undeniably. Men are raising their standards, choosing alignment over attention. Men are choosing peace over performance. Men are choosing real relationships over transactional ones. Men are choosing themselves. And the truth is, the world needs that version of man. Women need that version of man. Families need that version of man. Communities need that version of man, because when a man is grounded and when he's emotionally steady, when he knows who he is and what he stands for, he becomes a force of stability in a world that desperately needs it. So if you're a man listening to this and you feel overlooked or misunderstood, or like you're doing everything right and still ending up alone, don't lose yourself trying to fit into a system that was never designed to recognize your value. Stay patient, stay grounded, stay intentional, stay aligned with who you're becoming. Because the future isn't going to belong to the loudest men, or the flashiest men, or the men with the most options. It's going to belong to the men with character, the men with emotional maturity, the men who bring peace into every room they walk into, the men who know their worth without needing to prove it. And when the dust settles, when the trends fade, when the games stop working, when people finally get tired of chaos, it's the good men who will be standing, not because they chased, but because they never stopped choosing themselves. That's all I have to say for this week. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you more than you can ever understand. And I mean, if you want to get into contact with me, if you have a question or a comment, you know where to go. joeyfrancis.com. That's joeyfrances.com. And there's a little box. If you scroll down the website, you can write me a question, write me a comment, write me an episode idea, and I will respond to you. You can also buy my books there if you need help to figure out who exactly you are or why happiness is necessary for you. Just saying. And again, thank you very, very much. And remember, if it costs you your self-respect, it's already too expensive. Till next time.